TNKR Media.
The Goldwaters is brought to you by Goldwater Dubé, shaping the history of Canadian family law since 1981.
The Goldwaters vous est présenté par Goldwater Dubé, modelé l'histoire du droit familial canadien depuis 1981.
Welcome back to the Goldwaters. My name is Dan Delmar, your moderator, and I'm joined here by Daniel.
Hi.
And we're going to explore martial arts today. This is a tough guy episode, or is it? Is it about toughness, physically, or is it about mental toughness?
It's about breaking boards with your head. It's about walking up walls, crouching tiger, hidden dragon style, and it's about 1-inch punches that kill a man.
Wow, that's really intense. When did you first step into a ring, and why? Why did you want to learn how to fight?
For those of you who don't get my deadpan, I was joking just earlier. We're just talking about mixed martial arts generally. And to answer your question, Dan, I got into this about, say, 7 years ago. I had gotten out of a relationship, and I was kind of down and out, feeling sorry for myself. I was out of shape, and I wanted to lift myself. And I had a background in fitness with respect to just hitting up the gym. And I thought I would try to really mess with my psyche, and rather than just pure fitness routine, I said, hey, why don't I try fighting? What's out there? And I was completely a neophyte. I was just Googling these things. I was like, should I become a master in Aikido? Should I become a Ninja Turtle? I was really out. I really didn't know what I was looking for. And then finally I realized, well, MMA is a rising thing. And I just took the leap. I had all sorts of preconceptions.
So we're going to be speaking with a mixed martial artist and a coach here in Montreal. His name is Ryan Parsons of Apex Martial Arts. He's been recommended by a couple people who do this in town. He's a triple black belt in Muay Thai, Kung Fu, and Jiu-Jitsu. He opened his first of 3 Apex gyms in 2006 when he was just 21 years old. So we're going to head down the street, Daniel, and talk to Ryan about this. What do you expect to find? Are you comfortable in these situations, in these gym situations, or is it intimidating?
Well, I might have to fight him. No, it's not intimidating. I know the Montreal community, I would say, at this point in this world, and I know that they're generally very thoughtful, lovely people.
All right. Well, he comes highly recommended, so let's head over and speak with Ryan.
Cool. Hiya! Yeah, so we're here with Ryan, and I think this is a topic that I have a certain passion about, that I came about rather, I don't know, from diagonally, I guess, because I was never into combat sports as a kid. I had preconceptions about the whole thing, that this is for people who want to get brain damage, this is sort of for roughhousers, kind of goons. I had some pretty crappy attitudes, and my fitness background as a kid, my dad was really into bodybuilding, so I had all this like muscle and fitness mags and stuff. And when I was a teenager, I started getting into weight training, not to get jacked, but mostly just to look good without my shirt and attract women or whatever. So I was really into the aesthetics of it all. But performance fitness and like competitive sports was completely out of my wheelhouse. And the way that I started with MMA was about 7 years ago. I was in a relationship. I got into a depression. I wasn't treating my woman right, and we broke up, out of shape, depressed, down and out. And I'm like, I need to get back in shape, and I want to really like shock my psychology. Let me do something I never thought I would do. Started and just fell in love. So what about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people come at it, from that idea of they want to get in shape, and they're tired of the gym, and it's always the same thing, and the gym's boring, and they don't like the atmosphere. I had a bit of a different path. When I was 16 or 17, I was actually not far from here on St. Catherine near Guy, and I got mugged. I got beat up by like 4 guys. They dragged me into the alley, stomped me out, and took everything, my wallet, my keys, everything, and ran off into the night. And I was left there like shocked, definitely in this state of panic. And even for weeks after, like I was scared. Like I was scared to go out alone. I was scared to take the metro. I was scared to take the bus. I was always looking over my shoulder. And, you know, like that kind of cliche, I felt like a victim. And a couple months went on, and I was playing rugby at the time, and I wasn't really feeling it. And I was sick of feeling like a victim, and I wanted to take some kind of control in my life. And a buddy of mine was training. He's like, "Hey, why don't you come try out this class?" And like immediately, I felt better. Like immediately, I felt like I had some control in my life again. Like there was something that I had found that I could affect the way I felt on a day-to-day basis, and start building myself up again. So I was coming from this place of like emotional like suffering, you know. And so I had this big reason, this big hole in my life. And the more I trained, the more control I felt, and the better I felt about myself. And of course, like right away I was.
What kind of martial arts was it then?
Oh, I was doing kung fu back in the day. Actually, in this gym, it used to be a kung fu gym.
I have a question just about the kung fu, because I think you might feel me on this. Because what I learned from doing MMA and getting to know like the culture. Sure. Sometimes like they make fun of the kung fu guys, the karate gyms and strip malls, that this is more about ceremony. It's not. I feel like there's a sort of a tension between the two, like schools of thought.
100%. You know, the traditional martial arts in a lot of cases, and you know, they're like really good gyms, and there are really bad gyms, right? Yeah. There are really good MMA gyms, and there are really bad MMA gyms. There are really bad traditional martial arts gyms, and you'll find some better ones as well.
Because like I can say that just to share with you, like when I was there, like obviously GSP, I mean, for those who don't know, Georges St-Pierre, obviously our sort of, national and Belle Province hero in MMA. And obviously he's a great ambassador to the sport, no doubt. But people I know, like my trainer at the time, like, oh, you know, GSP, he's always like, I am a martial artist. And whereas other guys, like, I'm a fighter. Yeah. It's different.
Well, there's definitely a difference. I'm not going to throw out, you know, all traditional martial arts, right? Like there are definitely benefits to gain from it. Is it the most direct path to learning to actually realistically defend yourself? Definitely not. Can you get in shape? Sure. Can you learn about yourself and about discipline? Can you build your coordination? Can you build your physical abilities? Can you build your mental toughness? Definitely. I think where people get in trouble is when you have these more traditional coaches claiming to be the ultimate self-defense instructor that have never been in a street fight or never competed in their life, where it becomes a little bit disingenuous, and that's where the problems start creeping in.
I'm a child of I'm born 1984. My first exposure to martial arts, like Jean-Claude Van Damme. Now, guy was a serious athlete, and he was a competitive athlete, but and then Jet Li movies like that were coming over from Asia, which were just awesome, but yeah, there's sometimes you get into like chi and channeling energy and like Ryu throwing like fireballs, and you get sometimes it attracts a crowd sometimes of, I don't know, nerdy kind of wannabes maybe. I mean, I'm not trying to be dismissive to people, because that's how I thought of it too. I was like, this is kid stuff. Yeah. And then I realized getting older that there is a depth to this that is for real.
For sure, definitely. You know, I think, and like to bring it back, you know, when I started, I did start doing, you know, traditional martial arts, like a derivative of Wing Chun, and for me, it wasn't about fighting. I had never had the idea to compete at any point. It was really, you know, it was just this idea of like I want to be able to defend myself, and I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel healthy again, like mentally healthy again.
Well, the way that you're coming from it, I mean, is powerful. I mean, to have gotten roughed up like that and feel that sort of victimhood that you were talking about and trying to correct that. I mean, I can't exactly relate. I can imagine, but I mean, I've never been in a fight. Sure. I mean, you know, not in a controlled gym. And for me, my goals at the time were, like I said, because I came from more of a bodybuilding background, I was just purely into aesthetics. And I was like, I'll never forget this. So when I started going there and I started fighting, and I remember, I think the first 2 sessions, I'm cradled on the floor, like in a fetal position. There's a pool of sweat all around me. And I'm like, I started smoking a little bit, so I couldn't catch my breath for like 2 hours. And I thought before, I'm like, I was a certified personal trainer actually when I was younger, and before I went. And so I thought I'd seen what pain or performance was. I had no clue. And my trainer, I remember saying to him at one point, I asked him, I said, Justin is a great guy. And I said, hey, Justin, I'm curious, why is it that sometimes you see these world-class fighters and they don't have six-packs? And he laughed in my face. And he was like, Dan, a six-pack never won a fight. The guys who come in here with that mentality, we laugh at those guys. Like, it's a whole other thing. If you're thinking it's about aesthetics, you change your mentality.
That's so true, man. I just got back from Thailand. I was over there training for about a month, and you'll see, like, have you ever been?
No.
No. It's another, obviously it's another world, but it's like life-changing experience. You'll see these like retired old Thai guys are like taxi drivers. They're smoking, before the fight. They're drinking beer before the fight. They got a belly going, and then they hop in the ring, to make a couple bucks against this like super jacked, like North American dude who's been training the past 6 months, like going crazy, and just shredded. And, because of all the other factors that go into it, and especially the stress and the mental side of things, this guy who's in ridiculous shape ends up completely gassing out. Yeah. And the Thai fighter is taking his time, side by, ends up knocking him out in the 4th round, where you're going like, how is that possible? How is this guy still able to maintain his composure and still able to have like the cardio to keep fighting 5 rounds when this guy's clearly like more athletic looking, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was a glamour muscle, right? It's
right.
like, that's what they started telling me. If you, the guys that come here with the glamour muscle, they gas much faster.
Sure.
They're carrying all that weight and they're trying to pump their energy into that.
So part of it, in my experience, part of it is like how good your cardio is, what kind of shape you're in. Mm. But even more important than that is how do you manage your cardio, right? Where do you go all out in the first round, or do you relax? And what's crazy is because the context of a fight is so stressful and there's so much emotion, so much adrenaline. And I think this is really like the key to the martial arts. Can you handle that emotion? Can you handle that stress? Can you compartmentalize it, put it to the side, and still stay cool and collected during these periods of incredible chaos, right? Or are you going to be overwhelmed by the moment and just explode in this ball of like fury and aggression, right? Burn your gas tank, So for me, that's the biggest thing about martial arts is really, self-control, self-mastery, and emotional mastery.
I want to continue with that theme now, the emotional element, because, you're touching me with your words on that. And I'll say that a few things I noticed on the emotional level. First of all, at the beginning, when I first started, I was ready enough to start light sparring. First thing my trainer told both me and the other sparring partner, he says, you guys are going to notice that when you're sparring, you're going to be like punching deliberately to the side of the guy's head.
Right.
And that's because you guys aren't yet attuned or comfortable with violence. And it takes, there's a psychological training in terms of that. And he says and he had to it took 3 or 4 different sparring sessions before we kind of got the picture, it's okay to punch into the guy's face.
Right. Yeah.
And just that alone, and as again, sort of a weekend warrior kind of dude, I was like, is this good for my psychology to start desensitizing myself to punching someone through, and he says punch through his face. Your punch should be knocking him back. And that alone, and then once we started doing that, and maybe this kind of harmonizes with your point about the emotional level, is it was frightening to my mind. But then once I got used to it, there was almost more love and respect between the two of us. You know what I mean? The second 100%. You spar with someone, and it's not fake when you see it. I find in professional sports that after they'll hug it out, there's some sort of there's a bond.
Yeah.
There's a bond that's so hard to articulate to the people. They're like, what do you mean? The guy punched you in the face, you didn't want to bite his head off? I'm like, well, in the moment. But once it's over, you're like, I just shared something with someone that's so intimate. It's intimate.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And I can completely relate what you're talking about. When I started, I didn't want to punch somebody. I didn't want to hurt somebody. Right. And you realize, okay, the idea of like, for example, myself personally, my sport is Muay Thai. Like I started with Kung Fu and I've done a whole bunch of different things, but my passion, what I teach and what I train and what I competed in, and when I train athletes to competition, it's either Muay Thai or I do the striking for MMA. And the point of this competition for my guys, it's not about, okay, I want to take you here to hurt somebody. The hardest thing about defending yourself, it's not learning how to punch or kick. It's not learning how to, how to block a strike, it's really, are you going to freeze? Are you going to be in this situation in front of somebody and are you going to just freeze up in front of them? And everybody had that situation, right? Where somebody insulted them and like, and then 3 hours later they're sitting at home on the couch. Oh, I should have said this. You know what I mean? Like, and it's the same thing in like self-defense, right? So can you master that emotion, right? And then like you're saying the fraternity when you're in there and you're like, okay, I'm sparring with my boys and they're trying to kick me because the only way I can get better is if they're punching in front of my nose or they're punching off to the side. I'm not training any. There's no fear. There's no element of danger. I'm not pushing my boundaries in any way. I'm not getting better in any way. And I had a teacher, a super cool guy. And he would always say, martial arts, you learn so much about respect. When you can see that a guy half your size is able to really, really hurt you, you have to be respectful.
Well, and on that note, look, like I'm a big enough guy. I'm like 6'1", and I've never felt intimidated just into my physicality with someone else unless they were like a giant. And yeah, I had that experience when I started sparring with different guys at the gym. And there was this guy, very athletic, and he was like shorter than me and smaller, and he was like totally down to spar with me, and I'm like, and I go in there, and this guy's like the wind, and he's like, right. He's just making an ass of me in front of everybody. And that's when I recognized that whole thing about, obviously when you get to professional levels, weight classes are essential. For sure. I mean, absolutely. At that level of performance, like a few pounds will make a big difference. But I mean, for the amateur or less amateur, it's totally the instinct. That's what my trainer told me. He's like, Daniel, right now you're at pretty peak condition, like you're in great shape. You don't have the instinct yet. Like, you don't have the psychological discipline some of these other guys have already had, that they're not freezing up. In terms of that, I'm sure you've seen this. I'm sure it's my trainers would always tell me, like, the little things, right? So when in between rounds, right, where you're trying to get back your breath, stand up straight, don't, lean over. We all want to lean over when we're out of gas. And they say there's two reasons. One, it's like, they say it's like a straw, right? It's that if you bend the straw, actually, you're not getting as much breath into your lungs. That's the physical part. But they said there's a psychological part. When you're walking just straight and just breathing through your nose, like your confidence and also the psych effect on the other guy, even if you are super gassing, it creates an impression in the other guy that you are confident and unstoppable.
Well, and that's what it comes down to, right? Like, first of all, what a humbling experience. To be in there against somebody half your size who can spin you around their little finger, right? Yeah. But at the same time, like if you really, people ask me, oh, what's the best martial art for self-defense? I'm like, you really want to learn self-defense? Go sprint, like practice sprints, right. That's the best way you're going to defend yourself, right? Yeah. Like
run.
Yeah, absolutely. But okay, so then why do martial arts? And it comes down to that body language that you project, right? If you're confident, and you stand up straight and you look like you have confidence and you speak with confidence and you're able to manage a situation and not look like a prototypical victim, you're going to be able to avoid more situations than anything else. Like I had another teacher once, he told me, if any time you have to throw a punch, you already lost the fight. Right? You have to be able to talk your way out of it, control a situation, talk somebody down, have strategies to deal with that. And again, like you say, your body language, the way you breathe, that plays, like, I look at someone on the street, I don't know if they can kick or punch, but the way they speak to me, the way they interact with me, that's going to control so much more in everyday interactions.
Those are the tells, and I remember saying this to Justin. It was like pretty much my first trainer. Guy's built like a fridge. Like when we would start sparring wrestling, this guy can like move me with like one hand, like he's just like King Kong. I was amazed. I remember telling him, I was like, Justin, so I'm like, obviously I'm sure you're not afraid of anybody, huh? Like when you walk down the street, you're just like, I can kill anybody. And it was interesting what he said, because he also worked as a bouncer back in the day. And he's like, no, man, it's actually kind of the opposite, in that when I see somebody who's sizing me up, If they're sizing me up, it's probably because I might have a knife on them. If they're ready to fight me, then they're probably crazier than I am.
That's right.
And I get afraid. And so it's actually not what you would think.
Yeah, you see the potential that people have, you know, and I mean, most trained fighters, guys that have actually done martial arts for any amount of time, like they have nothing to prove, right? I mean, they prove everything either in the ring or in the gym, and they get that aggression out. Yeah. It's so rare that you're going to get into a street fight with somebody who takes like a well-trained stance, you know, like, man, it doesn't happen, right? Like most, obviously most, not everybody, but most fighters that I've come across are the most easygoing people, cool people, easy to talk to, not aggressive on a day-to-day basis, right? But that guy that he is looking for trouble, man. Is he on drugs?
Yeah.
Right? Is he messed up? Is he mentally ill? You know, how far is he willing to go? Like, if somebody's willing to start a fight with a complete stranger on the street, are they willing to kill somebody? You have no idea, right?
And to be able to have that reflex, someone who's looking for a fight like that is unstable. I mean, and one thing that I picked that up also is at the gym, because of course I had that mentality. I'm like, I'm sure these guys are all like getting to beer brawls all the time, and how stupid I was. The most humble, most like not blowhards at all. You don't feel any sense of aggression or violence on them. The one thing, just maybe you can share about this, that I noticed, you know, I remember Justin used to always tell me, he's like, yes, fighters are disciplined people and all those things. He's like, but you know, we're also very emotional people. You have to think like, what is every discipline, every school, every community attracts a certain personality. And so he said to me, like, because he would sometimes share with me, like when he was a punk, like when he was a knucklehead back in his adolescence or something, you know, and from what I detected, like, yeah, it is true. I mean, look, the story about how you got into it, like, I don't know all your story, but I mean, sometimes there are very emotionally intense, like, stories that these people having grown up, and they found that their discipline, they found their spirituality in this, and it's brought them somewhere that you don't see what they were before.
Right, definitely. And the other thing too is you have to be careful, like, overgeneralizing.
Sure.
Because like you said, you know, like-minded people attract each other, and every gym has its own culture. Like, I've seen some gyms that are just a bunch of absolute meatheads who do, you know, go out and try to pick bar fights every weekend, you know, and I've seen that. It's definitely the exception to the rule, but it does exist, you know, and I think people come at it for different reasons, and I think somebody like that, they've definitely missed the point and missed the opportunity that was there for them, you know, in the training and in their own personal development. But yeah, by and large,
you know, it makes me think maybe we could start getting into injuries, because I'm sure you've got your share.
Yeah, one or two.
And the time where I realized where this can go. So I was getting into peak performance. I was feeling very good. I was sparring a lot. And I remember one time I did a session, just a 1 hour session, and I was about to go home. And there was just some guy, never saw him in the gym before. And he's like, hey man, you want to spar? And I was like, sure, why not? And Justin was there, sort of my trainer. And he came out to me. He's like, Daniel, I don't think it's a good idea that you spar with this guy. First of all, you just did an hour. You know, you're probably gassed out. And I don't know this guy.
Sure.
So you might want, and I was so fucking cocky. I was like, whatever. He's a bit smaller than me. I've been around, blah, blah, blah. So of course I go in there, and he gives me a left hook in the first 2 minutes, breaks my nose. There's gushing blood all over the gym. It's like, you know, it just bleeds a lot from the face. And I have a deviated septum today. I had to get some surgery. And, that was also humbling, you know, understanding that if you keep pushing this, and if you really start to your ego gets too big, that's how you get injured. And it reminds me, you know, of course, Forrest Griffin, and for those who don't know, was I don't know if he's competing anymore, but he was once, he's one of the idols or the classics of
one of the pioneers.
Yes, one of the pioneers. Everyone should see his fight with, what's his name?
Stephen Bonner.
Yes, that's that's the fight that pretty much made MMA land in the mainstream. And he was a funny character. He wrote a book, Got Fight.
Yeah, I read it actually.
Yeah. And I love this part in the book where he says, there's two types of people who get injured. Those who think they won't get injured, and those who think they will.
Right, pretty much. Everybody gets injured, yeah.
But he says you have to be in the middle, ideally, where you're like, there's a chance I will get injured, and I have to be careful, but I can't be overcautious because then I will get injured.
Yeah. You know, for me, like, I don't let anybody walking off the street and just show up to sparring. You know, I want to make sure, I want to kind of vet them first, make sure they have the right attitude, make sure they're in it for the right reasons. And that's not to say that, you know, especially as guys get closer to a fight, or girls too, as they get closer to a fight, definitely you at some points you're going to ramp up the intensity of the sparring sessions, right? Because you have to prepare them. And guys that, you know, that have the attitude or the desire to compete, you know, you have to put them in those hard situations to get them ready, but you're putting them with the right partner, you know, and you're putting them with people that know that line between going hard and injuring. That being said, I mean, accidents always happen, right? And you could walk down the street. I mean, yesterday I was walking down the stairs, I missed a step, and I sprained my ankle, you know? Like I'm, you know.
I punched my desk the other day in anger, and I've like sprained my pinky. And,
you know, like stupid things in day-to-day life, you can get hurt. And then obviously you're talking about a contact sport where the goal is, I mean, pretty simplistically, to hit the other person.
Sure.
Right? Definitely there's a chance for injury. You just got to be smart. And what I've noticed, the most important thing, you can't be a hero. You can't tough it out. Like, if you're hurt, you got to let it heal. And you got to go see a physio. You got to go see your osteo. You got to go get your x-rays done, you know, and make sure that you take care of it properly right away. Otherwise, you know, it's never going to go away, or if it's going to take longer to heal at the very least. And you might, you know, you hurt your knee, you're going to tough it out, but your body starts compensating, and now your hip and your lower back start getting affected, you know, and now you're feeling pain in the other knee because it's overcompensating over there, you know. Whereas if you're just taking care of the injury in the first place, you could have saved yourself a lot of headaches and a lot of...
So let's do that thing. Let's share tell me some of the injuries you got. Like,
oh my God. Well, okay, I don't compete anymore. Because I was fighting in a tournament in the States, and it's the biggest Muay Thai tournament in North America. They have like over 600 fighters every year that show up to this tournament, and it's crazy. It's over the weekend, and it's just this marathon where you're fighting every day, and you know. In the tournament, there's so many things you don't control. You don't control who's in your bracket. You don't control the matchups. You don't control the guy I'm fighting on day 3 won his first 2 fights by knockout in the first round, so he's super fresh, whatever, you know. So I get to this tournament. The first fight went really well. The second fight, you know, it was okay. In the semifinals, I had probably the toughest guy in the bracket in the semifinals, and in that fight, I won the first round pretty decisively. I won the second round pretty decisively. And I made the mistake. I'm going, thinking ahead to the finals. Like, all right, I'm in this, you know, I just gotta get out of this round, and I'm going to be fighting for the belt. I'm going to be fighting for the championship. And that's like taking my foot off the gas. He caught me with the right hand and, just turned my world upside down. Like, everything went black. I managed to stay on my feet, but everything went black. I was fighting against a shadow. Literally, I couldn't see my opponent. I couldn't make out his features. After the fight, you know, I definitely had a concussion, and a pretty substantial one. I don't know how, but I managed to convince the doctor that I was fine. So I get home, I get back to the hotel. I realize, also my foot's broken. It's about the size of a football, and I have this concussion. I have to fight the next day.
So were you wise enough not to fight the next day?
Absolutely not. No, not at all. You know, and so I'm going in there, and to me it was like, it was this mountain, this pinnacle of my sport, and the ability to compete at that level and for this title was something I've been working towards for years. And I was 30 at the time, 31. Like, this is pretty close to the end of my career. It's pretty much now or never. And if it's not now, I'm going to have to climb that mountain all over again to really to achieve that kind of success. Right. So I fully understood the risks, and I fully was aware that what I was doing wasn't smart. But yeah, I went in, I fought the next day. with my broken foot, with my concussion. I won the fight. I won the title. I won the tournament.
What?
And I haven't fought since, right? Like,
So there's glory at least. Like, I was worried. Like, did your foot fall off? Like, what happened?
well, pretty close actually, man. That was pretty brutal.
You know, when you're talking about that window closing, you're saying you were 31 at the time. How old are you now?
32, almost 33.
Okay, I'm 34. And it's funny, you know, like professionally, I'm a lawyer.
Right.
And when I went to, when I started, I was maybe 26. And I was so ignorant, you know, because I remember saying as a joke, like to my trainer, I'm like, hey, you think I can go pro? And he said, he's like, you're kind of long in the tooth. Yeah. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm like 27. And he's like, the window closes early, brother. Like, you got to start. The guys who go pro start, I mean, then they're teens if they really want to get, like, you know. Right. And then I remember going to my colleagues at work, and I went to my friend Alex, and I was like, you know, Alex, it just occurred to me that, like, windows are closing, man. Like, you know, we're never going to be professional athletes.
Yeah. It's crazy when you see, like, now, you know, you see these hockey players getting drafted or whatever. And you're like, these guys are kids. They're so young. How are these guys making millions of dollars playing sports? Like, man, I'm old. I missed the boat.
Right. And I always felt young. I was the youngest in my family. I was younger than my cohort in school. I always felt in my mind like a kid, always like the baby of the group. And then I was just like, no, I don't have what it takes just in terms of my age. And when you talk about the injuries and you talked about the concussion you had, I just want to explore that a bit because
for sure.
I think when you talk about perceptions, right, from the outside, being punch drunk, having brain damage. I mean, these are very serious things. There's, of course, the whole scandal in the football, right. Professional football, and even amateur college level. And I had those preconceptions. And I told you, I was doing Muay Thai, and then I started getting more traditional boxing. Yeah, and I started when I was sparring a lot, and I started getting the brain pain. I remember, in fact, that time when the guy busted up my nose, or no, it was another time actually. I was sparring with another guy, and the guy was really trying to take my head off. And you've obviously experienced this. It was the first time I felt I had a concussion. Next morning, when you open my eyes, you feel this pressure behind your eyes, like your eyes are bulging or something. And I felt that for a few days. And when I was at work, like just scanning my eyes around the screen, if I rolled my eyes, I'd feel that pressure again.
Sure.
And my stepmother is an orthopedic surgeon, and she's like, yeah, your brain's puffing up. Like, that's what's happening.
Literally, yeah.
And I'll leave this off to you, but then that's where I felt like, okay, maybe I should explore jiu-jitsu. I should explore wrestling. Of course, those things have their injuries.
Sure.
But not as much just with pure boxing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Especially boxing.
Yeah, especially boxing.
But Muay Thai too, and MMA also, you know, like so I was reading an article, the most, in terms of concussions and brain damage, the most dangerous sport is football.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then hockey, and then boxing. Hockey and boxing, I might have mixed them up. But
yeah, but hold on. But with football and with hockey, I mean, from what I've read and what I understand, maybe you'll correct me, is that first of all, it's the speed on skates.
For sure.
That's what determines
the size of the athletes, the impact that they're taking.
But it's because the speed is sort of that catalyst for the high impact. And when you're talking about football, it's also it's the helmets as well. I think there's spearing that goes on.
Absolutely.
And whereas people, so if you compare it to boxing, where they're still wearing 12-ounce gloves or whatever it might be, that's just people punching with puffed up gloves on, but still doing a crap load of damage.
I think the biggest problem is the culture in all of these sports, right? Like, I played football. I got a concussion playing football. But you have to be tough, and you have to get right back in there, and you don't want to show your coach weakness. You don't want to show your teammates weakness, and you want to pull through on the other side and keep going and just help the team, right? And that's true of like all sports and all athletes, right? You want to compete and you want to help your teammates. There's training martial arts is great. Hitting pads is great. Working out is great. Fighting is not healthy. There's nothing healthy physically about fighting, between the weight cut, the training leading up, the sparring leading up, and the fight itself. These are all very, very bad for you. which is kind of ironic because this is what I do. And the people that I'm with, the people that I love, these students that I would sacrifice everything for on a daily basis. And I'm putting them in this line of fire, right? There is this risk associated with it. So it's weird because I think everybody should fight at least one time.
Yeah.
Right? Because of how much you learn about yourself and what you have to achieve, the levels you have to achieve, the discipline you have to develop, the dedication you have to develop.
You know, and another thing I found too, because I never did team sports, so I'm speaking a bit ignorantly,
Sure.
but one thing that I got from other people is like combat sports, it's one-on-one. Right. And that's it's unique. It's different from, say, football or hockey. You have to have sort of team dynamics, maybe interpersonal skills, and there's other skills that are honed there. But I remember, of all people, it was Vince Vaughn, the actor, one time on an interview, because he used to be a college wrestler.
Okay.
I remember he had this routine about it, and he was like, being a wrestler is a very lonely sport. There's no one in the locker room with you, like patting you on the back like your team. You know, you go out there, you're fighting some stranger, then you go back and you sit alone. That's why I think the self-development element of combat sports, of course, happens in all sports, but it's almost maybe more focused because
you have less people to blame.
Yeah.
When things don't go your way, like you can't blame your defenseman or your goalie. You know what I mean? Like you're the one competing. But I disagree to a certain extent because you can never, in the case of, let's say, Muay Thai, right? You can never win a Muay Thai championship without a team behind you.
Right.
Without training partners, without coaches, without people supporting you, a team of medical professionals, that sort of thing. And you were talking about that bond that you make with the people that you train with. That's so strong. Like that's the team. That's, after, for us, every Friday we do our team sparring for the guys that are competing. And every Friday after we go out for a beer next door, and we just, it doesn't go crazy. You have one or two beers, whatever, but just to sit down and like, be with these people in a different context and get to know them in a different context, and just laugh about it and make jokes and whatever. There is definitely a huge, team element. And that's why, especially for us, I feel so close to my athletes. I mean, I wake up early, I come to the gym early. I do private training with my fighters. I spend all day with these guys and I care really, really deeply about them. And the last thing I want is for them to get hurt, right? Which is why it's so hard when you're fighting, you go in the ring and you assume the risk, you know what you're getting yourself into. When you're coaching, it's somebody else assuming the risk. And you're giving up all this control, right? Where that's why people say, it's so much harder to coach than to fight. Well, okay, no, I don't agree. Okay. It's not, maybe at first,
but a different stressor. It's a parental role. It's almost like you're looking, this is like my kid. Am I putting him in danger or am I doing the right thing?
So as a coach, I'm looking at this and especially with my experience, right, where I had this bad concussion, I fought the next day, and I dealt with the consequences, I want to keep my guys safe. I want to make sure that they're, fighting is short. You're going to compete for what, until you're 30, maybe 35.
Unless you're couture, right?
Yeah, Couture.
Some guys are.
And even then, do you even want to be fighting in a cage when you're 40 years old? Come on, I hope you have something better going on in your life that you have to strip down your boxers and entertain people like a gladiator, right? But at the same time, I'm super passionate about this sport and I know how much benefit it's brought to me in my personal life. My whole business, my whole career, the way I support myself and my family is through the martial arts. Who I've become as a person, I think in today's society, the biggest problem we have is people don't have real challenges. Life is too easy, right? You're hungry, you go to the grocery store and there's a piece of meat in a styrofoam container. You don't have to hunt it. You don't have to track it. You don't have to feel hungry. And that's not to saying people don't live hard lives, because absolutely they do, but not in the way that, maybe a few generations ago we did, right? And everything's so convenient and everything's so easy that this kind of this kind of adversity that you can build yourself on as a person, it just doesn't exist. It's not as as common anymore.
Yeah, I want to expand on that, and maybe it'll like come to like another element of this discussion is I think I had mentioned before we started recording how it helped me in my career. Like it just interpersonally, I felt that I started to appreciate that like once I know I'd pushed myself to these places, that, part of it is like the fearlessness. Like if I'm negotiating with some senior guy and I'm intimidated because he has more experience.
At least he's not going to punch you in the face.
Well, that's the thing.
Right?
And I know this is how this might sound to some people. It might sound like macho BS. Maybe it is. But there's always that part of me like, I could take your head off if I had to. And I don't want to. I don't have to. But the fact that's in the back of my mind is comforting.
and really, like, I've thought about this a lot. To be a really good fighter in today's society is not a very practical skill. Right. Like you don't go around like walking into a furniture store like, I can kick you in the head, so I'm going to get a discount. Like it doesn't work like that.
Should work like that.
Man, if only it did. But the because of that adversity, it gives you like this scaffolding to kind of like, to climb, right? Where you can build yourself around these challenges. And that's why I think everybody should fight at least once, right? I mean, there's risk in everything you do. Absolutely. But who you become as a result of that experience. There's a quote, it's not about achieving the goal. It's about who you become as a result of achieving the goal, right?
Yeah, it's the struggle. I mean, it's, and in other ways that like more practical ways that helped me in my life, like interpersonally, was the importance of body language.
Sure.
The importance, like I would notice that when I'm in an intense negotiation, there's some guy I like or I don't like, whatever the context might be, I can use my body as part of getting what I want to get out of this person. So whether it's through eye contact, whether it's the way that I'm gesturing, it's maybe my space expansion, how much space I'm taking up in my communications, the way I gesture has a serious effect. I mean, it's a cliche now to say body language is more important than verbal communication. I mean, that there's a lot of truth to that. But I recognize, because after having been in the ring, there's some guys that would fuck my head up. Like when I would be looking at them, I'm like, well, the way this guy is moving with confidence and swiftness and a certain grace, the way that he's looking at me. I remember another trainer I had said, never look in their eyes. You look like right sort of in the center of their chest or their, suprasternal notch. And, he kind of teased me. It's like, you look more like a psychopath. Like you're just like looking through the guy.
Right. Yeah.
Beyond the fact that strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
Your peripheral vision, you see where the strikes are coming. If you look at the face, your peripheral vision is farther away from where the hands might be.
Sure.
But all those things, I mean.
Okay, how about just like the confidence to go approach a woman at a bar?
Yeah, I was waiting for someone to go there.
I mean, for me, this is the biggest thing. Like, yes, and I teach both men and women, and I'm gonna generalize a little bit, but I'm not in the business of training fighters. Like, I mean, superficially, yes, I am, but I'm in the business of building men of character, right? Men and women, obviously, but who aren't afraid to stand up for themselves, to ask for what they deserve and what they think is right.
Right.
The couple guys that are more plugged into the gym that I work, a little bit more with, and I really, I tell them things like, okay, you're going to be training kids, and keep the idea in the back of your head. Like, you have this opportunity to influence and inspire kids for the next generation. Like, be responsible with that. Like, what's the kind of man that, like, let's say you had a sister, you had a daughter that you would want them to date or marry, right? Well, instill those values in the people that you're training, right? And the kids that you're training, and then try to become that person yourself. I think in modern society, especially, men, we lack a lot of strong role models. And I think a lot of the problems that we deal with on a daily basis is people don't know who they are. And maybe this is going to sound controversial, but I feel like men today aren't men and women today aren't women. And because of that confusion, and it's okay. I'm not saying that it's wrong or it's right, or you do whatever you want to do. But if you don't have a clear definition of who you want to be and who you aspire to be, you're running into all kinds of trouble. You're directionless. So, And
to carry forward with that sort of the gender stuff, because that's a nice intro to the whole thing. I mean, naturally, we've been since we started recording this, we've been talking about the male experience,
right?
And I remember at the gym that I was training, of course there were ladies there. And I remember actually one time, so I sparred with one, because we're actually doing like a Shark Tank,
Sure.
Shark Tank's like, just for people who don't know, is where you're in the ring, you do like one round with one person, then another person comes in, you're just like constantly rotating. And there was this one woman, not a girl, a woman, and she was obviously, she was skinny, and it was just kind of, my brain was like, what do I do here? And and she didn't care. She was going for my face. And
man, they always do. It's crazy. Man, first of all, their fights are always the best fights. They're always super entertaining. And I don't mean to generalize, but they always are. And in sparring, they don't hold back. They want to go. They're there for a reason, They're there for something to prove. So yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, sorry.
And so so I'm like, all right, let me turn this up, and I punched her in the chest, like right in her boob, and she kind of laughed. She's like, my boob, and I'm like, huh? And then like as I shrugged, she punched me in the face, and so she was kind of psyching me out, right, I'm going to play the vulnerable girl routine with you, and then there was another more of a kind of jacked woman. I mean, she was very elegant, very pretty, but she was obviously clearly bigger and more fit. And she just invited me to spar one time, and she just had, the confidence, the ability of anybody. I mean, the gender issue started to just leave my mind.
Sure.
And
it's just a person at the end of the day. It's just a person in front of you. And can you solve that puzzle that's presented to you?
I like that. I mean, because in terms of solving the puzzle, it's like, in jiu-jitsu, you hear this a lot. For those who don't know, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, of course, and that's where you're rolling on the ground and you're trying to choke a guy out or make him submit. And they often say it's like a game of chess, right? It's more, people say boxing's the sweet science. So, there's always been these metaphors about the sort of the problem solving as you're going on about, like these are logic games too. It's not just how much can I take the person's head off. There's problem solving. You start to see what your opponent's skills are, and you'll start to adapt, in psychological ways, faking things out. And that's another thing that I've taken again into my personal life. How to, I'm actually training this young lawyer at the office, and I said, you got to have that drunken master style with certain people, where you recognize that they quickly adapt to whatever you're doing, and so they're very like an opponent negotiation, an adversary, whatever it is. And so what you always have to do is you got to be doing the drunken master routine, where it's like you make your voice intense, show the guy that you have anger. Then when he starts to push back and adjust to that, then you go into conciliatory and friendly, and then when he goes there, move something else. Like sometimes some opponents, in whatever game you're in, these are logic games, and how to adapt to the opponent. So it's like, that's why I always want people who are listening or people who are curious about these things to really appreciate these. Like I'm telling you, someone who's an outsider, you're somebody who has your own gym, is on professional stuff, has gone to Thailand and won a tournament with a busted up ankle and a concussion. I'm definitely not at that level, but these are things that stay with me forever, and I adapt to anything, whether it's personal relationships, people I love, people I don't love, and my self-development. It's really holistic. Like, and another thing, maybe just with respect to injuries, I'm curious what you were going to say about this. Not only when I was talking earlier about the concussion that I got and the brain pain, I did notice, and I was very careful, and I don't exaggerate, but I noticed my temperament was different as I was recovering. I was much quicker to anger. I was far more irritable. I very lightly spaced out a few times on people. And, this is a very serious thing in all professional sports. When you talk about in football, of course, part of the thing that led to the crisis were all these suicides, right?
Right.
Chris Benoit, the WWF fighter, tragic story, right? He killed his kid and his wife. And I remember a lot of people were saying this is a result of brain trauma, right? And because they did all they analyzed their brains after. And I remember reading an article about this is saying, guys, like, of course that's an element of what's going on, these professional athletes. But another part of it is just pain, being in constant pain. These people have injuries, back pains, and if you're in constant pain, you're more likely to be impulsive, to be anger-ridden, to not perform as much in other things. And look, I think you alluded to your family, so I trust you have a wife and kids, or you're a family man. I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, I'm sure you have pains that you might not be thinking of right now.
Look, I mean, brain injuries are no joke, right? And like I said before, with anything, but especially with brain injuries, you got to take precautions and make sure that you avoid them as much as possible. And if you do get injured, you got to let it heal and you got to take care of it properly. The worst thing you can do is rush back. You have 2 knees and 2 elbows and 2 shoulders, but you only have 1 brain, right? And the brain controls everything else. I think we live in a society that likes to sensationalize, and it's the hot topic. Oh, this year it's bullying. Next year it's something else, and right now concussions are definitely a hot topic, and CTE is definitely a hot topic. And it's not to downplay the dangers of these things, because I've seen it firsthand. Like I've seen boxers who are definitely undeniably punch drunk, who should have hung up the gloves years before they did, and who clearly got knocked out or got rocked and went back to sparring the very next day, right? But I also think that, and I'm not a doctor, this is my opinion. Anytime you have something that's become sensationalized, people overreact. And I'm not trying to downplay the danger of brain injuries, because they're super legit and super dangerous. But I read a study, 80% of people that played football at any level, Pee Wee, Bantam, professional, CFL, NFL, have some degree of CTE, right? Okay, how come 80% of people that played football didn't commit suicide or didn't, kill their family or don't suffer from depression? There's definitely other factors that go into it as well.
Well, if I can add 2 things to it. Look, I said, I'm a lawyer, right? So not a contact sport. The data are very tragic in terms of my industry.
Sure.
The depression, the addiction problems, the burnout, the suicide attempts, it's insane. I think they have like addiction rates that are about 3 to 4 times the average. And that's just the stress of that type of career. Yeah. So, just because it's easier to see like the visual intensity of what,
Sure.
guys like you do.
Well, it's easy to point to it, right? Oh, he got punched in the head. Now he's depressed. Therefore, okay, my uncle had Parkinson's. He never fought a day in his life, never trained martial arts. Yeah. What about the damage people are doing to their brains with chemicals and drugs and, people that get like blackout drunk every weekend? That can't be good for the brain either. I'm sure you're doing all kinds of, I think, you talk about injuries, you talk about damage, like life is going to damage your body, and how you choose you can do your best to live in a bubble, but at the end of the day, there's risk no matter what you do. And especially in a combat sport, right? So you have to be really, really aware of it, and you have to take the right steps to try to mitigate it as much as possible.
Well, I work in family law litigation mostly, so it's divorces. I'm seeing a lot of, intimate relations getting going off the tracks. And, as a young man growing up in that, I was sensitized to a lot of things. The way sometimes you'll see these people who on paper look like winners, you know what I mean? Like
Sure.
making a lot of money, have successful businesses. They've been neglecting their wives. They've been neglecting their children. They're underslept. They're fat. They're not taking care of themselves. They are so much stress in their lives that they are depleted. Their adrenaline glands are like depleted. And that's, we sometimes lionize these people like in more mainstream society. And now obviously there's a serious central tragedy. Guys like, the late Muhammad Ali, who's got, what do they call it? There's the pugilistic dementia, right? That's when it's from fighting. That's a tragic thing. But like you said, you live once, life is going to take a bite out of you and be wise.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, right, I think that the benefits that I've gotten from the sport and from martial arts, I'm in good shape. Like I'm healthy. I don't think I'm going to get diabetes. I'm not going to, I'm just in terms of living a healthy lifestyle and what that contributes to my overall quality of life. I mean, that far outweighs any of I broke my toe or I broke my foot, like I sprained my ankle. Right.
There's maybe one topic maybe we can end off on, maybe if you're open to this, is something that's always been interesting to me are the what I call like the class dynamics of fighters, because obviously when I got into it, like I already said, I had my own sort of maybe bougie perspectives on the whole thing. This is sort of like maybe a working class type of thing. My brain is more important. I'm a lawyer. I can't, risk these things. And then I started getting exposed a lot to I started reading all sorts of books, I watched every Tyson fight, all classic fights. I was educating myself. And when you go back, right, guys like Big Jack Johnson back in the day, and you really start learning your boxing history or combat sports history, something kind of beautiful and sometimes tragic at the same time is there's the racial dynamics, of course, especially in boxing. I mean, there was always the notion of the Great White Hope. This was, for people who don't know, if you go back and you look at Jack Johnson, the first black world heavyweight, and the whole thing at the time, this was in obviously 1920s or 30s thereabouts. Someone will correct me if you do the Google search, but this was obviously one of the most, when anti-black racism was way more intense than it is today. And the beauty that a man could rise above these things just through his body and rise to the top, and the way that affects other cultural perspectives, like who's this uppity black guy who's now like dominating the sport. And that's the expression, the Great White Hope. Like, we need a fighter to take this guy down because he doesn't know his place. And you see this also, Italian fighters, even, look, I'm Jewish. Right. And, going back to, way back, Queensberry rules. This is like the original rules of boxing going back to United Kingdom in, I think the mid 1800s. And I remember reading this book on the history of boxing, and one of the earliest, there was a Sephardic Jew, I think Spinoza, not the philosopher. Anyways, I think he was like Moroccan Jew or so. Anyways, the point being that he was the first guy, apparently. He was a small guy, and he was obviously a lot of anti-Semitic stuff that he had to suffer through. And at that time, apparently, it was seen as a gentleman's sport. And so people would literally just stand and go punch for punch and not like try to dodge and do things. And he was the first guy to be like, no, I'm going to dodge around this guy. And they were like, you shifty Jew, like you're ruining.
Sneaky.
Yeah, you're sneaky Jew. You're ruining the gentleman's sport.
Sure.
And apparently, he was like the first Jew in England to actually have like an official dinner with the prince or the king. Oh, wow. And this idea of class and cultural elements being blown up by combat sports.
Right, yeah. Well, I've heard the argument made, especially with boxing, that if you look at the demographics of boxing, it's always taking from the underclass, right? And there was a whole generation of Jewish fighters, and as kind of socioeconomically, the population works their way up through the ranks, you see less and less of those boxers and the Irish boxers, and it's kind of interesting. But I think now you see more and more, like in my experience, everybody's coming to martial arts.
Yeah.
Because it's not about, I'm trying to fight my way out of the ghetto. I'm trying to find some structure in my life. I'm trying to find something, to really challenge myself in a different kind of way. And probably in my gym, like 90% of people that come, probably even more than that, have no intention of ever fighting or stepping foot in a ring or even sparring for that matter. And so like just coming and doing a kickboxing class, like you're probably not going to get hurt. You're definitely not going to get punched in the head. There's no way you're going to get like symptoms of CTE or anything like that. But there is still that challenge, right? And then even within the people that are competing, man, there's people from everywhere. Like I had one of my students comes from a super wealthy family. Her father's a politician, brilliant kid. She's studying to be a doctor, but she wants to fight. Like, what? Okay, why? Don't you have something better to do? Right? Like, don't you have something else going on in your life? But again, I think, and I encouraged her, I think everybody should have that experience at least once to know what it is to really, really face your fears. And
this is kind of a nice compliment to your comment earlier that you made about something to the effect that, men don't feel like men today, women don't feel like women. There's confusion sometimes about identity and how to consolidate these things and feel confident in the world. And I think that I can say for myself, I think you're right. I think we're right at a time now where MMA has become very mainstream. You have people from all walks of life that are going to the gym, and we don't have the old maybe perceptions that we had of class structures in the past. And it goes in every direction. One thing I'll share because I think it complements this is I remember when I was getting into the fighting and I said to my trainer, Justin, I was like, all right, Justin, I know what you guys are saying when I'm not around. All right. I know it's like, okay, the Jew lawyer is coming by, thinks he's tough. And, he's like, you guys probably think I'm some sort of pretentious guy. And I remember what he told me. He was so confused. He's like, what are you talking about?
You're Jewish?
He says to me, he's like, why are you bringing your Judaism into this?
Sure.
And I'm like, well, there's a cliche that we're kind of wussy. And he's like blinking hard. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, we have Jews here who are fucking killers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so this is all in my head is what you're saying?
Yeah.
And he's like, yes.
At the end of the day, right? Like you said, there's only one person stepping foot in the ring. And you can't be judged on anything but the results you get in that ring. You could have the worst background, you could have a terrible lifestyle, but if you get in there and you win consistently, you're still winning your fights. Like, you can't be judged on what you did in the past or what you're going to do in the future. Who are you today? Are you a good person? Are you helping your team? Are you moving in the right direction? That's all I care about.
Well, that's the nice thing I took from it. That you probably heard this expression. I know progress is perfection. I heard it said from my trainer, right? So moving in that direction and consolidating yourself, feeling more.
But isn't that the key to happiness too, right? Like in not just in physical training, but in general, if you're making progress in life, whether it's with your relationships, with your family life, with your career, with your education, with your training, isn't that where you find happiness?
And I'll complement that with the beautiful rabbinical thing. Actually, I heard there's these contests in this shtetl going way back to Poland, and there are these two guys in the community who are very competitive. And one guy says, I bet you I could climb this ladder faster than you can. And he's, all right, let's do it. And let's get the rabbi to kind of judge who's better. So the rabbi comes in, he's watching it. So one guy, of course, sprints up really fast, and the other guy's like just trying, he's slow. And so they stop, and the guy who's at the top says, I won, huh? And the rabbi says, well, it depends what direction you're going in. So I think the other guy won, in fact.
Yeah. If he falls off, he's going to get,
Yeah, he'll win.
Yeah, exactly, right?
You are more developed and you're just showing this off. This guy's trying harder.
Yeah.
The direction he's going is more important than the end result.
I always talk to my clients about that, where they say, I can only do, 10 push-ups. Like, I'm not that strong. Like, am I really benefiting? It's in the struggle that you find the benefit. Right. If I can do, I can't, but let's say I can do 100 push-ups and it's super easy to me and I don't even have to think twice. And your maximum is 10 push-ups and you're killing yourself to get that 10th push-up. Well, if I do 50 push-ups and you do 11 push-ups, you get so much more benefit from those 11 push-ups than I could ever get doing 50 super easy push-ups. Right. And it's in that challenge that you find benefit, physically, but also spiritually and emotionally.
Well, Ryan, this was a real pleasure, man. I didn't know we'd hit it off like this. It was really nice.
Yeah, no kidding. I thought, we'll talk 20 minutes. How long has it been? Like, holy jeez. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for coming. And anytime, you're always welcome.
Yeah.
Cheers.
So, Daniel, not just about physicality, but a lot of mental toughness and a lot of, I guess, chess as well goes into these fights. I was really fascinated to hear Ryan explain just how much is going on inside the ring during a match.
Yeah, I was really taken with him. I think he impressed me. He seems like a very humble, very wise dude, and was thoughtful. And I mean, there was some natural chemistry, and I feel like we clicked on a lot of points. I mean, I don't pretend that I am anywhere near that guy's level of expertise. I mean, I'm just not. But I think the general cultural talking points and the self-development was really on display.
Do you think it's important that all guys or all people in general learn some sort of self-defense in their lifetime?
Well, it's funny, Dan, because you say self-defense, and I even think, if I recall, the Ryan pushed back on that a bit because, I mean, not to get all technical or obnoxious with you, but I mean, self-defense is more about getting out of someone attacking you on the street. Right. I mean, as I think Ryan said very well, if you really want self-defense, learn how to sprint. Or, I don't know, learn Krav Maga or something where you're just supposed to strike a guy in the throat and kill him. mixed martial arts and competitive fighting is something different. They're combat sports. But so forgive my obnoxiousness right there. But as to my impressions, yeah, it's lovely. I think we both did a good job, I think, of sharing to curious audiences and maybe people who know more a lot of the things that they're going to see if they try it out. And definitely, I think anybody should step into the ring at one point.
You spoke about this a bit on the podcast, but what lessons have you learned from fighting? Have you come away with sort of a stronger character because of it?
I would say so. I mean, I know that sounds smug, but to make it more narrow as an observation, and I've noticed it even recently because I've gotten back into the saddle at a fighting gym, the power of anger. Anger is a normal, healthy human emotion, despite the flack it gets as something destructive. And I've noticed in litigation that I've been doing here on the side at the office here and there, I have such a better connection to a sense of to my aggression and my anger and how to modulate it and make good, healthy use of it. To continue on that idea of how to modulate anger, something that I've recognized just last week, I was negotiating with an adversary, another attorney, and I recognized that I got into a punishment reward system with this colleague where whenever he would go into negotiations, going to a place I didn't want him to go, I was very agile with respect to signaling my aggression on that point and my opposition through my body language, through my tone, through the pauses in my speech. And then when he would go more in my direction, I was then able to, in an instant, climb down and be conciliatory and be warm and to demonstrate to the person that I'm not just a psychopath, I'm not a hothead, I'm being useful with my emotion.
So this is something that that can help people. It's not just, a way to unleash aggression. It could sort of teach you discipline.
Yeah, it's not... The takeaways for, I think, anyone who's done some MMA or combat sports, I think they'll all be on the same page as me. It does not enhance your aggression. It just doesn't. It's a common misconception that it makes you more violent. It's actually in the other direction. You have a better handle on something that we all go through in our own ways. We've all been aggressive with people at some points, and sometimes regrettably so. So this shows you how to rein it in.
Well, thanks, Daniel. And that was one of the more interesting conversations on the podcast, I think. And it surprised me a lot, just the amount of thought that goes into these things. I found that fascinating.
You know what's also going to surprise you when I choke you out after this interview?
Oh, no, please don't do that.
Well, if you're interested.
I'm untrained.
Okay, it's a good feeling. You just,
you think?
Yeah, well, for me.
That's another episode, maybe.
Okay.
Thank you. Don't forget, thegoldwaters.ca for past episodes, on Facebook and Twitter as well, at #thegoldwaters. And drop us an email if there's a subject that you'd like to hear the Goldwaters discuss. Talk at thegoldwaters.ca. I'm your moderator, Dan Delmar. Until next time.
This has been a production of TNKI Media. Good talk.